Welcome to PLZ Soccer. I'm joined by former Celtic forward Kris Commons. Kris, a pleasure to have you on the show with us here.
My pleasure. Good to be here.
You would have been at Dens Park on the night when Kieran made his debut for Celtic. Can you remember him coming through? And I think, if memory serves me correctly, there was quite a bit of excitement from Ronnie Dyle's part about Kieran coming into the first team. Do you recall just what kind of impression he made when he first stepped up into the first team?
Yeah, there was a lot of positivity about the thought of Kieran coming into the team. Now, don't forget, at the time we had a very established left back in Emilio Izaguirre, who was a huge fan favourite, a terrific player. But Kieran was knocking on the door for some time, and I think it was John Collins who was one that was that I do remember pulling me to one side and saying that this boy is going to be the next best thing. He certainly had all the tools in the bag. He just needed to obviously refine his game. He was still young, very raw, but his enthusiasm for the game, his willingness to win, his desire, and his all in all support of Celtic that kind of shone through. I always said this. I think Kieran Tierney, would have played for Celtic for free. He was one of those sort of supporters that lived and breathed the club. And I think once he did finally get into the first team, there was no holding him back. And like I said, his enthusiasm, his professionalism, his work ethic. I think it's good to have, when you do have young players coming through into a first team environment, that you have got first team players that are on that sort of wavelength in terms of bringing young people through and making them feel comfortable. I thought when we had a captain in Scott Brown, he was essential to that. So we had the likes of Adam Matthews, who was another very young fullback coming through, seemed to make that transition from youth team football into first team football extremely easy. The transition was pretty normal. Katie was another one. And yeah, at the time we had quite a young group of players that were surrounded with Kieran in James Forrest, Callum McGregor, young players, Dylan McGee, that were all, ready for first team football. But it's all, being ready for first team football, it's then your job, your duty to grab that with both hands. And that's something that Kieran Tierney did. Not only did he just make his appearance for Celtic, he took his game to the next level. He developed into a real physical presence, a real driving force, and one of Brendan's, when his first spell was there, one of Brendan's top performers.
Yeah, you would have seen the maturation of him really coming in as just a kid into first team environment. What's the difference between the Kieran Tierney that left Celtic, do you think, and the Kieran Tierney who's going to return now to the club?
I think you're getting a much more experienced player. Kieran's still only 27, I believe. I don't think he's 28 until later on in the year. So he's still very, very young in aspects of a professional footballer. So you'd like to think that you were going to get a much more experienced Kieran Tierney, but also that you will be looking to have the best professional years of his footballing career. Now, if you can keep him fit, which has always been a bit of a question mark with Kieran, he's suffered some really, really bad injuries, broken bones, he's had knee operations. He's obviously had the really, really bad hamstring injury that he suffered with the international squad. So if you can keep Kieran fit, and it may be down to Brendan when he does pick and choose the games that he is involved in, then you've got an outstanding left back. There's no question about it. On his day, is one of the best in Europe.
Yeah, that you mentioned before, that emotional pull about you would have played for Celtic for free and obviously grew up a Celtic fan, but can that sometimes be a hindrance for certain players? Like you almost need a certain kind of mentality to be able to cope with that. Sometimes the pressure of that can actually work against players sometimes, I think, when they go into first team level.
Without a question of that, you need thick skin to play for Celtic. I think the week in, week out, I would say the desire, obviously the expectation of needing and wanting to win every single week. But Kieran's lived and breathed that since he was a young kid. He'd known that at youth team level, certainly in reserves, and working his way up into first team level. So the expectations of winning every week, and sometimes even winning every week, is not acceptable. You know, if you're winning, scraping past teams 1 and 2-0, you know, supporters at the time when everything's going well, they expect 4 and 5. They want to be entertained. It wants to be a party atmosphere. You want to blow teams out of the way, and you want to be in a position where you're sending out a signal to everyone in the league that you are here, not just scraping through games, but a show of real dominance. And it's something that Celtic have certainly achieved in the last decade. Without question, the dominant side of that, winning trebles, the unbeatables, the cup success, and now finally, which seems to have certainly turned a corner in this last 12 months, the European football. You know, we've been known to scrape through the Champions League qualifiers. We've certainly got in there and you know, had results against us. But at this minute in time, we sit relatively pretty, and who would have thought would have been sandwiched in between Manchester City and Real Madrid in the Champions League group stages. So exciting times to come. Like I said, with Kieran being in there, if he can add that experience to the players that are already in that group squad, there's no doubt he will make Celtic a better team.
I was just about to say, is Kieran Tierney a player that just elevates the level at Celtic, particularly when you're going and trying to compete at Champions League level? Not just now, but obviously Celtic's ambitions would to be in that environment over a sustained period of time. Yeah,
I think Kieran Tierney, it brings in a next level of experience in that regard, international level, certainly Champions League level. I think when he's on song and he's, you know, fully fit, he's arguably one of the best left backs in Europe. So if you can nurture him through those injuries that he's had, keep him fit, obviously he'll be extremely motivated to make a point of this is the best years of his career. And I think it will be one of those sort of players that when supporters do see his name on the team sheet, especially in Europe, it will give them extra confidence in the defence. It will definitely give them a lot more expectations of going forward. You know, I know he's scored a couple of goals. He certainly plays a huge part down that left-hand side in assisting goals. He's a real true modern fullback that gives you both options. And if you, like I said, I keep reiterating this comment, but if you can keep him fit, without question, he improves Celtic.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel as though his best years are still ahead of him?
There should be, without question. At 27, I think if you look at any sort of footballer, I think between 27 and 31, you would say that your body is at optimum peak performance, experience, just the knowledge of the game, the understanding, the tactical side, and knowing exactly whereabouts, you know, you're supposed to be on the field and your role off it. I know that Kieran Tierney will probably be a captain in the making also. I know that that's something that he's certainly played a bit part in. But yeah, I think Kieran Tierney will be a captain of the future if he keeps himself fit and plays week in, week out. There's no question for the young team coming through at the moment, you know, 15, 16, 17-year-old lads that have got aspirations to play for Celtic's first team. Kieran Tierney will be a player that you will be looking up to and trying to emulate what he's achieved over this last 10 years.
You mentioned earlier just about John Collins pulling you aside and saying, you know, this is a kid coming in to join in first team training from the academy that we think's got everything. What was the moment for you where you maybe actually saw that for yourself or recognised it in him?
It was coming into a team that we had a real good established left back in Emilio Ezagiri. And let's not forget, I think probably 12, 18 months prior to Kieran making his debut, Emilio was the reports and the talk of potentially being a Manchester United target. So, you know, it was no easy stretch for Kieran to come into a team and try and get that left back spot off a extremely good left back in Emilio. So it was going to be hard work for him, but he didn't let that kind of bother him. It was always one of the first into the changing room. He did look up to Brownie. I think he was a huge impact on how he was, even down to the, you know, wearing the t-shirts in the very, very cold Glaswegian weather. He didn't want the snoods and the gloves and all the skins that went with it. You know, he was very, very, t-shirt, shorts, get on with my day, as hard as I possibly can. And sometimes he trained so hard. He was so determined. He was so wanting to make an impact in training. I remember one time he came back from a long broken leg, and within 20, 30 minutes of us doing a training session, he broke his leg again. Even the noise of that still haunts me, but it was just his desire to train how he plays and his enthusiasm to improve as a player. And it wasn't afraid to ask questions either. It was one that would ask me when I get into certain areas in the final third, where would I want the ball, ask the centre forwards. I've a direct correlation with his wide men, and try and get an understanding, because he wants to make every little millimetre, every inch, every little thing improve. And if he could do that, then he would have a real chance of not only being a real good Celtic left back, but also, as he did do, put himself into a window where he was subject to a nearly £30 million bid from Arsenal.
Were you ever surprised at that when the time was coming for him to leave Celtic, just at the sort of figures that were being quoted with him, and the transfer record that he actually did eventually go for?
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely difficult to try and get the fees that you see down south for players in Scotland. I think we have in the past earned good money from the likes of Fraser Forster, Victor Wanyama, Virgil van Dijk, players that went for good money. But if you look probably the next year after that, once you've made that move, then you need to really establish yourself at that level. I think obviously going from the SPFL, playing Champions League once, every month for 4 months is completely different to playing in the Premier League once, twice a week. So that's the next level of trying to raise your game, where you are playing as you would do for Celtic in the Champions League. Can you replicate that on a Wednesday night? Can you do that on a Saturday afternoon? And if you can do that, then you see the likes of your Virgil van Dijks, someone that really did take it to the next level. I think Kieran Tierney would have been in that bracket of, playing week in, week out. If it wasn't for his injuries, I still believe he'd have a role to play at Arsenal if he was fully fit and, in that team. But I think with injuries, the way that Arsenal are at the moment, he's now down the pecking order. But it gives him a real opportunity now, once he's back, found his feet, and gets playing football once again, enjoying himself, that he'll be a real asset to Brendan Rodgers and Celtic for these next few years.
It's maybe made for a kind of awkward couple of weeks for Greg Taylor. His contract ended at the beginning of the month, and he's free to discuss other clubs. But it's obviously quite difficult as a player, I think, maybe just to cope with that, and the clamour from the club support to get Kieran Tierney back and come into his position. There's been a kind of few awkward moments along the way. Do you have a bit of sympathy for where he is just now, just in terms of his predicament?
It's a strange one, because, as I said before, Kieran Tierney has had his injury problems throughout these last couple of years. So I don't think for 1 minute that Greg Taylor's Celtic career is over. I think he would play a bit part if Kieran was fit, but certainly if Kieran's not up to speed, or if he's not fit, or if he's carrying knocks, then Greg Taylor plays every day of the week for me. I think he's been a terrific servant for Celtic. Is he as good as Kieran? Probably not, but on his day, he's a certainly good left back, and someone that you would like in and around the dressing room. He's involved in the Scotland setup, so he's certainly played at a real good level, and he offers a great deal down that left-hand side. So whether or not they can accommodate the both of them, obviously you're not going to keep the two of them happy if one's not playing. But what you can do is try and give them game time as and when. Now, if Greg Taylor doesn't fancy that, he wants to play first team football week in, week out, then obviously with Kieran coming in, that certainly is going to limit that. So he may be looking to his future, playing week in, week out, where he will be in Steve Clarke's eye, that he will be playing. Obviously, if he's playing injury-free, playing well, it puts him into the setup for the Scotland qualifier. So it's a big one for Greg Taylor. Does he sit around and wait for his opportunities, or does he go elsewhere and try and get some first-team football? But yeah, only time will tell with that one.
You think he's been a bit underappreciated by the Celtic support at times?
He just had some big shoes to fill. He's never going to be a £30 million player like Kieran Tierney was. So big boots to fill, and not only big boots to fill on the field, off the field as well. Kieran had a incredible rapport with with the supporters, had a real understanding of how Celtic should play, what they wanted and expected, and he delivered. So you had the Kieran Tierney that you've seen week in, week out on the football field, and you had the Kieran Tierney that you've seen off the field, a true Celtic through and through supporter. So Greg Taylor was up against it in that regard of filling his boots for that. But I think he's been a terrific servant. I think he's played particularly well over the course of this season. He's won trophies, so he's got that experience there. It's just whether or not Greg Taylor wants to actually play week in, week out, and not have that competition of potentially playing a second man to Kieran.
As a player in general, how difficult is it just to cope with the window, particularly the January window, when there can be so much speculation about players if they've just come out of contract? What kind of effect can that have just in terms of your day-to-day preparation and just your concentration levels?
Yeah, I mean, I've been kind of in both scenarios where obviously Celtic bought me towards the end of the January transfer window. So playing for Derby at the time was very strange because there was a few clubs in for me. There was a lot of meetings going on, whether or not I was going to be sold, keep staying at Derby. And there is that sort of limbo. Where am I going to be playing my football? Where am I going to be uprooting my family? And that can be a little bit distractive. But on the other side of it, I've also been involved in a very settled team, and the speculation over your better players in the dressing room. There's a lot of speculation over the likes of Joe Ledley, Emilio Izaguirre, and obviously Gary Hooper, who at the time was one of our best centre forwards. So potentially to lose one of your best players and try and replace him or not replace him would be difficult. So that kind of does unsettle the squad from that aspect. But once the window's shut and you know where your squad's at, who's in, who's out, you can then really concentrate on achieving your goals and what you've laid out in pre-season, what you want to be doing. And that's obviously for Celtic, winning titles, competing in Europe, and then looking forward to what should be a cup final in May.
Yeah, because they've obviously had, they have players who have caught the eye already. If you look at Nicholas Kuhn and the impact that he's had, he arrived last January for Celtic. I think maybe the club only have seen the best of him this term so far, but obviously his goals, his assists, the way that he's been playing have caught the eye. You think Celtic will be keen to just keep all these players that they've got just now? You don't really want to sell anyone at the minute, just as they look to make an impression in the Champions League and to sustain that dominance in terms of domestic football? Yeah,
Celtic won't be wanting to lose any of their most prolific players at this minute in time. I think they are in a good place in an attacking sense. I think they've got some real intelligent players, some good energy up there. They've got terrific pace in all areas. So I think for Celtic and Brendan especially, will be looking to improve. Now, where do they improve? If it's left back, then certainly Kieran Tierney ticks all the boxes there. But Celtic's been renowned and very, very good at replacing good players that have left. Jota, who was an outstanding talent. You kind of look, where can we find someone of his calibre? Where can we find someone of his quality? And then obviously Kris Commons comes through the door and just makes that transition very seamless. So they have been very good. There's no doubt that they'll be working extremely hard behind the scenes to identify targets, players, if there's some sort of miraculous bid for their top talent. But no, I think for Celtic, they'll be looking to keep hold of their top players, add to the squad, improve, and really finish this season off on a high and start 2025 like they did last season.
Where do you think they should be looking to supplement the squad at the minute?
It's a good question. I mean, they've got a formation where they play one up front. So, you've got a couple of strikers there. Do you bring in an extra one? I always think when you do improve, it'd be good if you do improve in the forward areas. I think when you've got someone that comes in that can score, that's entertaining, that's attacking, it keeps all them centre forwards and especially wide men really on the toes and sharp and fit. I think, you could argue that a left back would be an improvement in there if Kieran can come through the door. I know Kasper Schmeichel is, probably towards the end of his career, but still does a good job. But I would say that goalkeeper would be one that you could probably look to improve for the future, not for right now, but certainly they'll have the eye on that, because with Casper, the age that he's at, you're just not sure how long he will last.
Yeah, absolutely. You obviously came up to Celtic from Derby. Do you think there are a lot of players who maybe just walk into Celtic and don't really appreciate the relentless demands that are on the team all the time?
Yeah, there's not many players that I would say that would come from the Championship into a side like Celtic and have that sort of environment of, no matter how bad you play or how bad you feel, you have to win. You have to win the games of football. You have to find a way. And if you don't win, it's the end of the world. And if you do win, you've got to win with style. You've got to turn it on. And if you are not winning games, if you're not winning trophies, if Rangers are doing well, then obviously that has a huge impact on the way that people see. So, yeah, I think you do well to find any sort of player that would be used to that relentlessness of having to win in the Championship. I know firsthand that playing for the likes of Stoke, Nottingham Forest, and Derby, that sometimes you can be not winning 3 or 4 games and still find positives. Now, if you did that with Celtic, there'd be no positives. Even if they were just hiding in the background, you'd still be under severe pressure not to win football matches. So it's a difficult one to find anyone that will come into that environment and actually be okay with it. It's a real eye opener, and not only an eye opener, but it's a pleasure to be in that environment, and a joy to be actually playing in that environment where you are in a position that you not only should be winning every week, but you are in a position where you've got a great set of players, great set of fans that give you the opportunity to win football matches every week.
Yeah, you obviously thrived within the pressure of that kind of culture, whereas other players maybe struggle with the intensity of it. I mean, at the minute, Celtic have a commanding lead in the league table, a league that stretches to double figures, and yet there has still been elements of criticism across recent weeks.
Yeah, you're never going to please everybody. Like I said, the cauldron of Glasgow, you will always get someone that finds a negative, even in the best of scenarios. So, I said earlier on in the interview, if you win 1 and 2-0, some people will not be happy because you're meant to win 3 and 4. So the most important thing for Celtic is they're in the right direction, in the sense of, finances. The club as a whole is in a very, very healthy position. They've got a good squad. They're doing well in Europe. They're cruising at the top of the league, and it's a great time to be at Celtic. Great time to be a supporter of Celtic. It's a superb, couple of years that the supporters have enjoyed. So long may it continue. But the hard work that goes in behind your scenes, you can't fault that. That it is a relentless machine that keeps churning out top quality players, good youngsters, winning trophies, and long may it continue.
I think a few people might have been surprised on the 2nd of January just at the manner of Rangers' win over Celtic and how dominant they were in that fixture. But do you think that gives Celtic the bit between their teeth the next time that the teams meet to go and just reinforce the message that they are the dominant team in the city?
Well, from personal experience, it's certainly not a normal game. It's a game that I absolutely thrived on. I love being a part of it. I love the whole build-up of it. I love being a part of it. Many times that we got beat by Rangers. We got beat in the cup final. Got beat. Never, as a player, did I win at Ibrox. So one that didn't, one box that I wasn't able to tick. But a game that, you want to be, when you are a dominant force in Glasgow, you want to be sending that signal out week in, week out. And if you are relentless with your not only performances, but scoring, defending, clean sheets, even down to the finances, I think that sends a huge signal that when Celtic are in such a healthy position financially, they've got a good squad, they've got players in that squad that are worth a lot of money. They're in a position where they can go out and get the likes of Kieran back in the door. It sends signals out there that, we're here to stay, we're number one, and we're going to stay here for the foreseeable future. So yeah, I think the blip against Rangers was a one-off. I think if you look at the course of the last 10 years of where Celtic's been alongside Rangers, it's night and day. So a little bit of a blip, nothing to be too concerned about, but certainly something to keep a watchful eye on in the next fixture, because it is a cauldron of fire. It is a massive game, and I don't think there'll be that sort of leniency with maybe some supporters thinking it was a one-off if it does replicate itself again.
You feel as though it's a game where reputations are sometimes made? When you're at Celtic, it's a game where you have to really impose yourself on the fixture?
I think reputations are made, yeah, in the big moments against Rangers. I think if you are a player that thrives in that game, I know Tom Rogic was one that certainly loved this fixture, scored some very goals. You have to mention the likes of Henrik Larsson, Lubo, guys that had see this game for what it was and appreciate it. And, every emotion, every feeling that you take into that game, it's always on a knife edge. You've got to be extremely careful that you don't go overboard. But yeah, thrive on it. I think there were a few people at Ibrox that, not so much rabbit in the headlights, but definitely a bit of an eye-opener of, we can't just turn up with 7-8 players and expect to win. Rangers played out the skin. They played extremely well. I think Celtic were very, very lucky to come away with the scoreline. I think Casper made some good saves. The post, they were close on a few occasions. So it was a real shock, but something that I think experience-wise will play well into Celtic's hands for the people that played in it, that needed that sort of eye-opener. Beat by Rangers in extra time in a cup final. And I think that experience was better for me, seeing them celebrate, seeing the all emotion, feeling as if I'd let everyone down. That kind of then gave me the fire in my belly for the next games, that I wasn't going to be, any stone unturned, that I was going to be 110% prepared, dedicated, and at all costs make sure that you win the game.
You scored a few times in that fixture yourself?
A couple of tap-ins, yeah.
Are those amongst your favourite Celtic memories?
Yeah, I think, I've scored some half decent goals, but when you score good goals in games of that magnitude, it certainly takes it to the next level. So the goals that I did score against Rangers, certainly still have memories of those, in my head. My kids still watch them, so it's brilliant. We've got both my young boys that watch all the Celtic games. They've got all the Celtic kits and still wanting Commons 15 on the back. So long may it continue. And this Commons house is definitely a Celtic house.
Have you been back up to Glasgow for a game recently?
No, I've not actually. And do you know what? That was one of their Christmas presents. They want to come up to watch a Celtic game. So I will be up in the near future, and I will be, I'll be bringing my boys to come and watch. I imagine the last time that they seen Celtic play would have been, 2016 maybe. So yeah, nearly 10 years.
Oh, okay. Well, listen, that's all we've got time for. Thank you for your time, Kris, and thank you for joining us in PLZ Soccer. Don't forget to download our app where you'll get all the breaking news at your fingertips.